Welcome, everyone, to the Fat Tony's podcast. This is the show where we spend 1 hour, once a month, talking to a real-world expert in order to help us understand and navigate modernity. Ernest, Boehm, welcome to Fat Tony's.
Nice to be here.
I always ask the guests this, it's becoming a bit of tradition, but because we know each other so well, could you tell us a little bit about your background, your career, what you're all about?
So my education is, I have a degree in chemistry from North Dakota State University and a degree in classics from North Dakota State University. I actually had a job as a paint chemist originally. Part of that career was watching paint dry. And so it was literally that boring. So I went to graduate school because I started to test boredom at Illinois Institute of Technology, where I got a degree in chemical engineering. And from there, I worked for a company called UOP, which is originally called Universal Oil Products, which is now owned by Honeywell. I worked there for 23 years. So I've worked in our pilot plants, our R&D group, our startup services group, so basically starting up refineries and in that job. I lived overseas for about 5 years and lived in about 20 countries, started up about 17 different technologies, and then I went into our engineering group and our sales support group, and now I'm back in engineering. So I've done natural gas treating, natural gas processing, LNG complexes, and liquefied natural gas complexes. Then I did this technology called Maxine, which is complex liquid solid phase separation unit. And now I'm the specialist in methanol and methanol to olefins and olefin cracking process. So basically I can take CO2 and hydrogen, can be made into methanol, or you can combust trash and make it into methanol, or you can make it from fermentation, or you can make it from natural gas. And methanol can be converted into polyethylene, polypropylene, or like jet fuel. So I'm the subject matter expert in that area of chemical engineering for UOP.
Wow. So you mentioned you'd lived, I think it was 15 different countries or more. What was the reasoning behind that? Were you sort of dispatched from country to country with a specific goal to start new refining or energy processes? Or were you sort of parachuted in to trouble solve? How did that work?
A little bit of both, but so my company sells licenses. They don't sell, they sell equipment and catalysts, but mostly they sell licenses. So we sell a design, then someone builds the design, and since it's a big plant, it's, you sell a design, do the engineering, you send the drawings and all the specs to people. They procure the specs, put it together, and then it needs to be started up. And we supply like catalyst and some supplies. So we'd have to do a full inspection of the refinery units or petrochemical plant units, load the catalyst, bring the hydrocarbon oils in, and then meet the guarantees like how much product yield you get, product quality. We have separation processes, so purity of chemicals and things like that are all sort of measured. And startups can go from a couple days to years depending on problems they have or, how big the unit is, So I could be starting up one small little process unit, or I could be starting up a whole complex. There'd be troubleshooting where we need to collect data to do some analysis and fix a process unit or to make it run better. So I've done, troubleshooting and startups.
And were you ever able to, you mentioned sort of setting things up and the licensing aspect. Was there a two-way process there? Could the data you collect help to improve and refine your own products?
Yeah, in the agreement is that like data collected, if it comes up with a new innovation, we pass the innovation back onto the customer for free as part of the license. So if, like, let's say we found out that we could put 3 more trays in a column, and that would make the separation better and get more yield or a higher product quality. Then we would pass that back on to the customer. So yeah, there's when people buy a license from us, as long as they're paying the license, they sort of get the best of that technology handed forward to them. Now,
Hmm.
implementing those changes, but old existing unit might be expensive, so they don't have to implement those changes, but they get access to them in sort of bulletins. And then if there's engineering design that's required, we would don't charge for the extra engineering design.
Right. So, in terms of, again, I've quite limited understanding in this area, but you talked about specializing in gas, liquid natural gas. This is kind of in the middle of what I maybe call the kind of green to dirty energy spectrum. It's not renewable green, Andrew, but it's nowhere near as bad as, coal and oil and things like that. It's kind of, am I right in thinking it's somewhere in the middle?
So when I was part of the natural gas work, there was a lot of talk about CO2 sequestering. And right around 2008, a lot of that went away with because it's expensive to capture and sequester CO2. And the subsidies weren't there.
By sequestering, is that the capturing of carbon and storing it physically? Is that what you mean by that?
You can physically store it and like you can inject it into injection well deep within the earth. You can use it for enhanced oil recovery. So putting in like natural aquifers just to store it or to use it to press, liquids out of the ground, or you can chemically convert it. So the new generation of things there's a lot of green energy projects. There's 2 routes to methanol that are sort of green. In Europe, they burn a lot of their waste products, right? And they make CO2. If you take that CO2 and convert it with hydrogen to methanol, then you can go to petrochemicals or to jet fuel.
Okay.
So it's a new sequestering path is saying, hey, I'm going to burn this waste, but I'm going to convert the CO2 into a usable product, and then I get carbon credits for it. So the original path was just bury it underground, and now it's chemically converting it is the new path. And this is also like there's degrees of greenness. Like you can get electricity off the grid, or you can have like a green electricity source like wind or solar.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the thing about wind and solar is the problem is it's usually not very locally convenient. Like the southern tip of Chile may have like really good wind farms and no one that really can use electricity. So what they want to do is they want to convert that electricity into hydrogen by stripping hydrogen off water, and then they can go to methanol with methanol and CO2, and then they can go to jet fuel or petrochemicals, and those are transferable. So there's a lot of transferable technologies now because like the solar farms are not easily built in cities or the wind farms aren't easily in cities. Usually the land is out of way places because of real estate costs. So like I need a cheap place with a lot of wind that's far away from a city, but I need to somehow use that energy. So now there's a sort of move for chemical transfer, basically taking electricity and chemically storing the energy. So there's like, you can store hydrogen on hydrocarbons and transfer it by boat and then strip off the hydrogen, use that for fuel. So that's one pathway. There's this methanol pathway. There's an ethanol pathway. So there's multiple routes to jet fuel and gasoline or plastics. So like something you can physically put on a train or put in a pipeline or put in a truck and ship it instead of having to get it to a grid that's 2,000 miles away from the power grid.
I know in the UK we're a little bit guilty of that. I think we've invested quite a lot in wind farms, being geographically, we've got the North Sea. And I don't know if you follow Gerald Ashley on Twitter, but he follows one of the energy generation dashboards that the government here puts out. And one of the main problems is just the variability of the output can be very unpredictable depending on the conditions, the environmental conditions.
Yeah, so that variability is being built into these plants. So there's storage capacity for hydrocarbons. There's something called turn down where you can run a plant between 70 and 100%. There's also like, hey, if the grid needs power, you're shutting down. So that's all sort of part of these contracts and this is the point of liquid fuel is once you make a liquid fuel, you can put it in a tank and you can store it where electricity is much harder to store. And then so you're going to use electricity to make hydrogen and you're going to try and be between 70 and 100% of your throughput, maybe as low as 50%. So you can take some of these swings of variability and then there's a lot of times where if it's windy at night when no one needs electricity, this chemical plant doesn't care. It always needs electricity. And if they make more electricity than they need, they will use it up and try and push, more through the unit. So the units are usually over designed for 110 to 120%. So they have a wide range of flexibility. So that sort of helps with the variability thing. But it can be a problem if you have no wind, the unit's going to shut down and you're losing money. So, and there's also I'm not going to go into all the subsidies because that's sort of customer specific, but they're very subsidy driven. So these things would have a negative investment rates if they were not subsidized in some way. They'd have negative IRRs, negative return on investments.
It's interesting. I remember reading a while back that it's not quite the same thing, but you mentioned the carbon credits earlier, that Tesla, for example, its main profit center is actually selling carbon credits to other car companies. And the revenue it generates from that is actually what carries it over into profitability. Without that, it would be loss making. And this sequestration, you mentioned it as sort of being a bit of a boom time thing, maybe about a decade ago. And then I think you mentioned the bust as well. Was that bust purely because of just the economics of it not being efficient, or were there sort of changes in attitude towards it?
Well, you have to chemically strip CO2 from like let's say natural gas, right? That's very energy intensive. But you're doing that anyway because natural gas needs to be purified and can't have a lot of CO2 because they'll corrode pipelines, right?
Mm-hmm.
But usually that CO2 ends up at very low pressure. So to get it underground in injection well, you have to compress it, liquefy it, and then get it to a pressure where you can pump it a mile down. And hydraulically, if you're going to inject a mile down, 2 miles down, you're going to have a lot of sunk energy costs to pump that CO2 down underground. So it's basically saying, hey, there's something I can put to the atmosphere for free if before there's any carbon credit, right? Or I can spend millions of dollars a year putting it in a hole where it isn't going to be of any value to me, right? So there was always talk about that being subsidized, and then when the housing crisis happened, those subsidies went away.
Right.
So the technology for sequestering is there, but the demand isn't.
Right. So it's really the subsidy disappearing which killed it, in your opinion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. It's interesting because I remember personally about, I'd say 15 years ago in London, there's a lot of buzz about carbon credit trading, a lot of startups kind of operating that area, creating marketplaces. And I was never really heavily into it. You just sort of came across it in the background. And then it seemed to disappear overnight. So a lot of what you're saying makes sense framed in the context of, the housing crash, the Great Recession. I'm not sure if the European policies were aligned with the US ones in terms of revoking subsidies, but it's definitely something that seemed to be around and then just kind of vanished a little bit.
Well, I mean, solar and wind were the route that Europe went, and those were not sequestering carbon. That was just generation without emission.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that Germany and other countries have had sort of a mixed result on the green because of the green power because of flexibility. I mean, so there's the T-Bone Pickens model where T-Bone Pickens said he was going to build a $2 billion wind farm, but he needed 100% redundancy in natural gas. So he got the permits for the natural gas plants, and then he never built the wind farm, right?
Yeah.
So there was a lot of games like that in the States. I think that in Europe, they subsidized a lot of wind in Germany, a lot of solar, a lot of nuclear. So you can either capture the carbon and sequester it, or you can try and go a route where you don't emit less carbon. So I think that, that led to the Volkswagen crisis. They said they could emit less with their cars. Diesel was the way because diesel engines were more carbon efficient, and then they weren't, right? So I
think Morocco as well is going very hard on solar, and I think the long-term plan is to actually sell it back to Europe. So it's going to be interesting which way that goes. And obviously, wind in the UK. I find interesting about gas, liquid natural gas. And this is maybe going into a little bit of a Talebian thought here. But when Russia invaded the Ukraine a while back, there was an energy crisis here in Europe. Our prices went through the roof.
Yeah.
And the solution was to import liquid natural gas. And I think Putin was betting on the fact that we just didn't have infrastructure here to handle large imports of liquid natural gas. And what we saw, I think Germany led on this, but just this colossal undertaking of infrastructure being built, ports and storage of liquid natural gas. And it was done, within a year. And it's this huge victory of kind of the decentralized Western system coming together against what I think Putin would have foresaw as, just not being able to do that, or not betting on us having the political will to do that, perhaps, and still having to buy Russian gas?
Be a pretty bad bet because the technology pure and the technology is all there. It's just implementing and doing the project in a year is pretty quick. But I mean, it is like I've seen things go up in 2 years. Also if but that's sort of also in the middle of nowhere. Like it'll be somewhere in the Middle East where manpower is short, engineering is short. You have to import it. You have to build you have to build a city before you can build the infrastructure, right? And then they build things on the Gulf Coast of Texas, like lickety split, right? That's done in a year. So it's often location that drives it. And, for example, like the US was importing natural gas and now we're exporting, right? So they flipped all those ports from import terminals to export terminals. And there's ports that are not being used that are waiting for their chance to be converted to export ports. So that technology has been converted and reutilized, and it's pretty flexible, right? Yet a port is a port, right? Now you just need, instead of a vaporizer, you need a compression train and a refrigerated ship. The same ship's going to dock. So now you need an offtake instead of an intake, right? So it's like I'm just saying that infrastructure, well, it's huge. Like the cranes, the equipment to design it, equipment to build it, the people that can build it all exist. So.
Mm-hmm.
And those people often are sort of very cavalier, sort of switch companies a lot. So like wherever there's a big demand, those people will immediately be there.
So I think we're talking about, LNG and the future there. I think Nassim also says on several topics, he's never seen a shortage that wasn't followed by a glut. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing here in Europe as well now with LNG. What do you see kind of longer term shaping the industry? Do you see LNG here to stay, or do you think it will gradually decline?
Well, with LNG, there's in petrochemicals, there's usually a shortage. People build up capacity. They build up plants that are twice as big as the original plants. There's like a doubling in size. And then there's a glut. After the glut, there's the people that have the smaller plants get pushed out because they can't produce at economy of scale. And then there's the world uptakes, and then there's a shortage. So I don't know if that's going to go on forever, but that's sort of the cycle now. That's been the cycle for the last 100 years. I don't know if we ever get to a sustainable level where there's not a higher demand for petrochemicals. And I mean, eventually we should get there, but so far we haven't, right? So
yeah,
I don't know. I don't know if there's sort of a breaking point where you can only have so much humanity and so much need, and so it's interesting right now. And then like right now also, I think there's going to be a shift to greening the product. So that's probably the next 50 years of chemical engineering is making things greener. Like the goal of zero emission refineries. Like the office buildings in Honeywell by 2035, they said they're going to be carbon neutral, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that means like the building I'm in right now is never going to be carbon neutral. So it's going to be eventually abandoned, and we're going to be working somewhere else before 2035, right? So there's this whole sort of movement with LNG, though. It just goes exactly like Nassim says: shortage, boom, people bust, the offtake increases, and then there's another shortage.
Yeah,
And it's same with aromatic cycle. I mean, everything is very cyclic in the chemical industry.
So it sounds like you're not too concerned. It sounds like you've been through several iterations of this boom bust cycle. And I think there are a lot of industries that work like that. And I can see how energy would as well.
I don't know. My family has picked this time for ultimate chaos. So.
What I wanted to do, Ernest, is I wanted to move away from your career and energy a little bit. Talk about you, because, I've known you for a few years and I see you as kind of a modern day Renaissance man. And you have, I think you call it, and you'll have to forgive my pronunciation here, but the polyfurcated life. What do you mean by that?
Well, bifurcated is two, right? So polyfurcated is just taking that to the next level. Like you have more than one thing going on. So like a bifurcation means a binary, and I don't see things as necessarily a binary. Since I was very young, I grew up in a very boring environment. And I think that we were sort of chatting about a negative role model. So I had some very negative role models. So it was sort of like, I want to get out and do these things because these people haven't done these things. Like people are arguing about inheritance and, kissing people's ass about money and I just wanted out of this. I wanted out of the whole system, right? I wanted out of this rural place. I want to live in a city, there's this huge technology boom where, like Walkmans came into play and when I was a kid and Discmans came to play. So like you went from having just the radio and records and unportable music to if you're sitting on a tractor driving in circles, you could listen to all the police records, right? You had access to thousands of records. You could bootleg cassettes. People would cassettes or CDs and you'd make a copy and you'd be able to portably take music around. Used bookstores sort of took off. So, in my hometown, there was 2 used bookstores. I sort of raided them repeatedly. I found there was a county library I had access to. I had a petition to get to the city library. Then I had high school libraries. So, start getting access to libraries. And then as I got a little bit older, I got to this point where maybe after I was established in Chicago for a while, that I would get a question. Like I had friends that were in the fine arts program at the Art Institute. And you'd be sitting there and there'd be people be like, well, my kid could draw that. And part of me was like saying, well, could his kid draw that, right? Could I draw that, right? So I get this question that would bug the hell out of me, and it's a question that no one really seriously answers, like, what would it take to be an abstract artist, right? How long would it take? Could anyone do it? Could someone's kids do it? So that question intrigued me, but how do you answer that question other than doing it, right? So that's how I started painting was more I had that free time on the road. I was in TV countries with foreign TV, so I found oil pastels. I found something that I could pack in my suitcase. I worked on paper because it was easy to work on. But I was really trying to answer that question, still answering that question. I think it takes to develop like a style of your own or styles of your own and being able to paint first is trying to figure out what the answer to the question is, right? So the answer to the question isn't, what do I mean by being an abstract artist? I have to have a style that I can repeat on demand, get what I want, and I think is unique and also sort of, if not uncopyable, that like it's unique to me. And I also found out that most people don't want to copy other abstract artists. So like most people don't want to look like someone else. So that wasn't a big problem. But like it's easy to make something sort of gibberish like that's just random and that you can't control. But having control over that was the interesting question. Like, how long does that take where you can say, I want to give, like you said, I want this color, I want this sort of object, and then I can create the painting and I have some control over it. And then like, how obsessive do you have to be at it? What do you have to give up? It's free time to do it.
I love that. I love the beginnings of this being almost an empirical drive to answer the question, could anyone do this? And setting out to prove for yourself what it takes. And there's almost a bit of a juxtaposition there, because obviously you're a trained classicist. And maybe a trained classicist, and maybe I think you described yourself as a closet modernist. I also love that you kind of have a thematic way of approaching your creative output. You have the year of X. And I know you've done like the year of piano. I think you did a year of opera, or you might mix that in with piano. And you set yourself, a focus. It's kind of, you amble, but within kind of focus guidelines.
So originally this came up as I would say I watched a lot of operas, so I call it the year of opera as a joke to my friend Linda. And then I was reading a lot of plays, so this is the year of plays. So at first it was sort of like I just doing this sort of obsessively. Okay, and so this is the year of this, right? And then there's this C.D. Gray came up with this themes instead of a New Year resolution. You generate a theme. And the idea of a theme is it's vague, right? Like the year of plays doesn't mean I'm going to read these 20 plays in this time frame. It's going to be I'm going to think about plays, and when I get an opportunity to read a play, maybe if it's read a newspaper, read a play, or watch a movie, maybe I'll consider plays first. I won't never say I'm not going to watch a movie or I'm not going to read a novel, but also just like sort of thinking about plays as much as you can, like it's in your background. So you could do like a year of health. Like this year, I sort of did year of song and verse, and the verse part didn't turn out very well, and the song part did, right? But it was like I put hard goals in and I almost made none of them. So like I found that you need to make it less concrete and more vague helps, because then you get something out of it, and it's probably more serendipitous. And you know, you're sort of, you don't feel like you're getting knocked down if you don't finish this book of verse, right? Like I tackled Walt Whitman, and I just didn't have the energy for Walt Whitman this year, so I never got past Walt Whitman. So like, a whole shelf of verse that I wanted to read this year, and I'm not going to get to it. And at a certain point, it was like, okay, I'm giving up and just reading novels because I feel like hungry for novels, right? So like,
Mm-hmm.
and at a certain point, it was just like, I'm not reading anything because I'm trying to read Leaves of Grass and I can't get very far. So like, I think the theme thing works better if it's sort of more general. Let's say you have a year of health, right? This is the classic example. You don't set like, I'm going to lose 20 pounds and have a six-pack abs. It's like, I'm just going to start looking at health, and it's like, oh, I don't have any time to work out, but I can make my diet a little better. Hey, I'm behind on my sleep, whatever it is. It's just those sort of things, these minor, like you have more of it's more in your head like a theme than it is like a goal. And then like, hey, my sleep is better, my eating is better, I'm a little bit healthier.
Yeah, it's interesting. You kind of want to find that sweet spot between giving yourself a little bit of confinement, but not being too specific. Because I think it's a Rory Sutherlandism that he says that a little bit of confinement can help and aid in the creative process. But like you say, if you give yourself a specific goal, like I'm going to read, X novel or lose 20 pounds, you're basically setting yourself up to fail. Or if you're a glutton for punishment, like me, you will set yourself up to gruelingly go through something you just don't want to do. And it's not enjoyable. So I think you're right. There's that kind of sweet spot in between those two extremes. Any idea what 2024 is going to be?
Well, 2024 is going to be probably working on some piano, having a repertoire piano, having a few song repertoire things I can play. And then I like to build a portfolio, art portfolio. And usually I just give away my portfolio, but I'd like to, if I have a portfolio, maybe I'll do something with it, but I have to have it first. And I see like people like Ian Parcell has a portfolio. I mean, he's sort of retired and has a second career as an artist, which I admire, but like, he has a portfolio, right? Like he has a body of work, or my body of work. I wanted to see how that was a question, like how many people's houses can I hang in as an artist, right? That was like a question, like, and it was like, and I sort of get this nastiness to me when I try and sell stuff. I get overly excited, and I sort of, my brain kicks into this hyper, like I have to sell, and I pressure people, and I'm like, I didn't like that. But I haven't had a portfolio, so I'd like to have a portfolio and see what I can do with it. Do I want to show? Do I want to set up like an Etsy space and just sell there? Do I want to ask maybe someone like you to help out or whatnot? I don't know what to do until I have the portfolio. But like, and also like, if I don't ever have the portfolio, then I'm not going to ever do anything with a portfolio, right? So it's like, it's a question of like, I'm able to hang in people's houses. People like my art enough to hang in their houses. Should I do something with it more professionally? Is it just I'm better than the last time I sort of tried to develop a portfolio? I'm way better, right? So like 10 years of just giving it away. I mean, what if I didn't give it away? What could I do with it? What would I build? Would I go back and sort of, would pieces influence each other? I don't know, because, does it lead to new things? Does it need to, what does a body of work look like? I don't have it, right? So that's like that's the next question. And then just repertoire, like I'd like to be able to play like 30 minutes. Maybe this is again too concrete a goal, but like just be able to play for 30 minutes without having to do much. Like right now I'm at a couple minutes of songs. This could be could take a while to develop. I don't know what it takes, but like it's sort of thinking about it. Like there's 7 preludes that I could learn by this one person. Do I want to learn all 7? Do I want to learn 3 of them? Just start thinking about like how do I keep them alive as repertoire? Do they, talk to my teacher a little bit more about it? Like, do you just sort of abandon it and come back to it, and it's easy to come back? Like maybe that type of discussion is something I want to have, right? So that would be like the next thing. I think too is like you sort of participate in the Tarot Tuesday, right, sort of thing.
Yeah.
That sort of came up from like an ex-girlfriend just was terrible at reading tarot, and it was like, what does it take to read this? Can I read better than her? And that question was easy. She just wasn't very good at it, and she wasn't very good at swinging narrative together, and she just like very sort of rigid, wasn't very creative. But then with me, it's like, well, what does it make, what does it take to be like like a skeptical reader, right? Too.
Hmm.
I'm not believing that I'm predicting anyone's future, right?
Yeah.
But I'm sort of telling you things about yourself. Like I know you, so you're like easy to read for, right?
Hmm.
And I probably know what notes to hit, and like also I'm not going to be like if you said, hey, I'm gonna like if someone said, hey, I want to break up with my girlfriend, I'm not sure if I should read the cards. I'm not going to do that reading because that's like that takes all the fun out of it, right? I'm doing it for free and I can refuse questions. But just sort of like being able to be playful with this cards and then just to find out how much of a train wreck actually the whole system is. Like it literally is a house of cards. It's like everyone who ever came up with a new system totally made it out of whole cloth, right?
There's a lot of beauty as well in the actual artwork of the decks. Tarot is something I never thought I would be interested in until you started doing your Tarot Tuesday. But I could really see how you could get into collecting tarot decks. They're all so unique and different and really beautiful. And I love your traditions that you have on Twitter. You bring a lot of joy to the corner of Twitter that we inhabit. You have your Tarot Tuesdays, your short order Saturdays. It's just really, really nice. And there's also something I've seen on your bio, which I'm not 100% sure about. I'm conscious of time. I know we've only got a few minutes left, but I really want to ask you about the Hard Book Project. Could you tell us about that? Because I think I've missed that one.
Well, that's that sort of meta list that I've sent you. The like the I rank books as I read them. It's sort of a meta system for rereadability. But it was just maybe I had the opposite problem that you had is I was reading just whatever came along, right? And not taking any hard books into consideration is like, well, I haven't really read Plato. I haven't really read St. Augustine. I should start exploring them. There's some foundational sci-fi books that I haven't read. There's authors I like. I haven't read all their books. It was sort of more of a just being serious about reading, like not reading trash or reading less trash, right? And finding something that it would be rewarding. And if I finished it, I said I didn't like that book. At least it was like I read something of import. I contended with it. I didn't like it, but it wasn't just like a throwaway sort of novel sort of experience, right? And I wasn't reading all stupid books, but it just was like for like 10 years I would just read whatever the next book was, right? And so then I just said, hey, I want to read more philosophy. I want to read harder novels. I want to read more complicated novels. I want to read a lot of plays. I want to read books on music.
So this is like the prototype for your years of. This was almost like a year of reading when you kind of made this conscious decision to start maybe approaching reading in a more structured manner.
Yeah. Yeah. But then like this year I had a huge rebellion. Like I was going to focus on verse and I just ended up reading. I'm reading Kundera novels, which I consider hard books, but they're effortless for me, right? So like I've been reading a lot of Kundera lately just because it's sort of like I don't have to kill myself to read Kundera. So I go with ebb and flows. I have some Everests that I'm halfway up. Like I'm trying to read the entire Bible. I'm halfway through the New Testament, halfway through the Old Testament. I was sort of stalled trying to read all the books by Roberto Bolano. I'm halfway done with that. His quality varies a lot. So like, is it worth going back through someone's back catalog if there's lesser novels till he hits his stride, right? There's things to learn, like, but is it really worth learning it, right? Is it worth finishing Walt Whitman? Now that I have a taste, I mean, I'm sure it is, and I probably will get back to. I just had a year where I was very low in energy, and I'm getting my energy back, so I might be able to pick up some of these, start climbing these Everests again. But I mean, like In Search of Lost Time, I'm two novels out of finishing In Search of Lost Time, right? So it's sort of like, when do I pick that up and when do I finish it? Like the piano, also like I'm a serial allocator of time. So like if I start piano, I know I have to give up things. I can't say I'm going to do piano and all the books I want to read and art and cook, and like piano is going to take up a certain amount of bandwidth. And like my career is sort of taken off, so that's taking up bandwidth. So it's sort of like
Mm-hmm.
I'm running into like serious, bandwidth issues too. Like, so, and as you get older, your bandwidth, you have more opportunities. You have to say, like we just had this conversation today, when you're 30, you should almost say no, never say no to an opportunity of any kind that you don't think is detrimental to you, right? When you're 40, you actually have to start thinking, well, I have four opportunities and I have to pick one. or two. I can't pick all four, right? And then when you're 50, it's like people come up to me and say, "Would you like to work in my group?" And I like the group I'm in and I like what I'm doing, so I've been saying no. 10 years ago, I really couldn't say no, right? Because there's no way for me to, because that opportunity loss is too huge. Now it's like my current opportunity is as valuable as these other opportunities, but they're out there, right? So if I got really tired of my current job, I would take something else on. And like I'm just saying is that the bandwidth issue is much bigger than it used to be. Like it's like probably double what it was
Yeah.
10 years ago.
Yeah. I think again, it's quite Talebian. He talks about taking more risks when you were younger and definitely optionality as you get older. I'm feeling it myself, it does, there is a sort of entropy to it to a certain degree. I'm really conscious of time. I know you've got to run, Ernest, but I did have one question that I really wanted to talk about before you go. I wanted to talk a little bit about Jean-Paul Getty, who famously, or at least semi-famously, said that he only hired trained classicists for his position in his oil company. And the reason he gave for this was the method that classicists go through, especially, when learning Greek and Latin. It's not just teaching a language, but he believed teacher taught you a kind of structured form of thought and rigor that you could then apply very successfully in business. Now, as a classicist who works in the energy industry, I'm curious, do you agree with that? Do you think that's a little bit overhyped?
Well, I think so I work with everyone as, at least a bachelor's degree and I have a master's degree and I work with a lot of PhDs and people with various degrees of experience. I think that there's a rigor to education, right? So there's this whole push against, there's these people saying you don't need a degree, just get your parents to give you your college money and invest it and you'll be a millionaire. Well, if it works, you'll be an uneducated millionaire. You won't be a systematic thinker with rigor. So I think with classics, and I think that was the importance of it is not necessarily finding all the ancient wisdom, is that the classicists did a lot wrong and they had very convincing arguments and very high respect for authority and learning where to challenge that authority. It's almost sort of a subversive education. It's just because, Augustus said this, was Augustus and when Augustus said and how he said it and why he was saying it.
Mm-hmm.
You have to take the whole context and is he trying to save his ass because there's a flotilla after him and Antony's about to crush him? Or is he saying it as an emperor that wants to maintain power? Or does he want, Rome to be stable and he's trying to do it for the good of the country? You have to ask these contextual questions and you have to always sort of challenge these thinkers. So there's this whole ancient wisdom sort of tradition where everything that comes from the ancients is going to be wise, right? And as a classicist, you're going to find out that they're often beautiful and unwise or beautiful and wise, and you had to pick it out. And I think Montaigne is the perfect example of this, that he's looking at contradictory, this guy does this action, this guy does this action, this guy says this thing, and this guy says the same thing, and one has his head cut off and one is made emperor, right? There's a lot of randomness, and the ancients were trying to deal with that. And but there is this thing you can Caesar structured a society, an army that could, every time Caesar marched, he slept in a camp. They would go 20 miles, they would build a camp. There was a rigor to their output, right? They weren't we're going to sleep in the mud. No, we're going to build something. If we stay up all night, we're going to build something, or we're going to do 4 days march and then we're going to build something. But there was sort of this rigor in this plan. And then, if you read Plato's Republic, there's nothing in Plato's Republic, I think, to the verse that I agree with, other than when Socrates says, the only reason why I'm able to talk about this is I live in a society that isn't like the Republic, but it's a free society. So I can come up with this elaborate plan on the structure of society, but if I actually lived within my society that I wanted, I wouldn't be able to even talk about this society. So there's those gems in there, doubting the very system that you're purporting, and then there's arguments, is Plato anti-republic or pro-republic, right? He always leaves it open, which I think is just Plato's way of being sort of a true subversive. I think he really does believe in it. And but that's sort of the part of the hard reading project is I went to a small university. I didn't go to Princeton or Vanderbilt or Oxford. I didn't go through the old classic book sort of tradition. I had chemistry classes and I had some good classics professors. So I read some Greek and some Latin. And then just being a modernist, I just sort of, when I was doing this hard reading project, I kept track of what I was reading. And I do have a tale that's in the classics. It's overwhelmingly, you know, last 50 years, the Pareto goes up like last 10 years has more books than the last 20 years. Last 20 years has more books than the last 50 years. Last 50 years has more than the last 1,000 years, right? Sort of Pareto distribution on what I'm reading, right? So even if I've classically trained, I'm very hooked on the modern writers and the new things in writing. And I also, again, like my bandwidth for classics has its limits, right? And I like Milan Kundera. I mean, my definition of a classic isn't like anything that's been written in the last. My sort of put the beginning of the modern at Shakespeare, and I think that's actually a little bit early. But Shakespeare and Montaigne, I think, are great modern writers. And everyone would say they're classics, and they're not classics.
That's interesting. So you have a wider definition of what you would consider classics than most people.
Well, I think the idea of modern classic is a total misnomer. It's like it's just an unproven text. Could like it. I mean, like I see this with Harry Potter. The generation of kids before my kids all read Harry Potter religiously.
Yeah.
It's down to like 25%. Like my kids don't read Harry Potter. They don't care about the movies. And for 20 years, it was like, oh, that's all kids cared about. And I know adults that are like, it's their life, like they have Harry Potter posters at work at a chemical engineering company, right?
I know a few of them in real life, Ernest. I know a few people like that in real life. It's it's interesting. Fandom's a whole other topic.
Yeah, and I enjoyed the books too, but I mean, fandom is fleeting, and like I thought Harry Potter was going to be one of these lasting sort of things, but I think it's already sort of burning itself out.
Well, they cancelled the latest films series, Fantastic Beasts. I haven't seen any of them, but I heard that they've been cancelled.
One good idea is hard enough to come by. Like Harry Potter was a very good idea, right? To come up with 2 on demand in a lifetime when you're like the most popular author in the world is like almost impossible. I mean, Planck came up with 2 ideas. Stein probably came up with 10 good ideas. I mean, he's considered like genius of genius, right? But like, if you look at like how many good ideas, me and someone else whose name I won't mention because he's a bit paranoid have talked about this, what it would take to come up with a totally unique idea, right? Like it isn't easy, and you'd have to give up a lot of things, and you'd have to sort of. I mean, I've seen people do this in literature where they pick a topic and then they won't talk. Like a friend of mine picked up Cuban detective novels as a niche, right? And wanted to say things about them, but he couldn't talk to any of his friends about it because he didn't want to get polluted, and he couldn't talk about his other friends because he thought people would poach his ideas or poach his space because it's sort of like, hey, I'm Cuban, I know people that read these things, I know the books, and it's really sort of unexplored space, but to actually find an unexplored space where you could comment on something is very hard. So this sort of original idea, like J.K. Rowling having an original idea, and then her having an adult book original idea or another kids book series idea, like she had a bunch of interesting sort of stupid books that existed that weren't really of any interest to anyone that she tried to exploit. I mean, this is the same problem with Star Wars. It's like, oh, someone said something about Bothan spies. We need a movie about Bothan spies. It's like, no, it's a nice little mystery, but there's nothing really to the mystery. It's all whole cloth, right?
I think as well, there's a modern trend towards universe building. So as soon as a franchise is popular, it almost needs to be run into the ground and built up and expanded as much as possible. Obviously for a monetary incentive, but I don't remember this being around as much when I was a kid, but the last or so, 20 years, really seems to have become big money. So we're running out of time. We're coming up to our hour now, Ernest. I just want to say thank you so much. It's been really, really interesting conversation. If it's okay with you, I was going to share in a link the spreadsheet you sent me, which I now realise is your hard book project, if people wanted to browse it. And I just wanted to ask, is there anything you want to give a shout out to? Any projects you're doing, blogs, websites that we can push a link to if anyone's interested in just finding out more?
I'm sort of just, you can follow me on Twitter. That's really where I do most of my sort of just communicating. That's usually right now. I'm again, like I said, I might build a portfolio. Once I build a portfolio, there might be something there, but I just haven't. I actually have to build the artwork, I feel, before I can build like the web page, right, sort of thing. So I really don't keep a web page. I don't. I guess like all my hobbies are very personal. So like this whole, I don't know, I sort of had like these momentary tastes of like little tastes of fame or tastes of like I could sell this art. And I sort of get this nastiness to myself that I don't like. So I build a portfolio and focus on the portfolio. And then like, is there a way, like people have said, you don't sell your own art, you have someone else sell it, right? So like, if I have a portfolio, can I find someone that will sell it for me? Or can I set up a system where it's sold and I, you know, am sort of out of the loop, right? Like when I have to go into promotion mode, I sort of have an ugliness to my side that I've noticed, and I don't want to propagate that, right? That's sort of why I gave my art away for a long time, was for that very reason, is that like it was like I had more joy giving it away and spreading it out than I made enough. I guess the thing is too is that like it's a weird fuck you money situation. I guess is that I'm sorry, I don't know if we can cuss or not. Maybe you can add that out, but like the fu money thing is I have like I can afford to have profit loss. How would I say it? I have centers of loss or nonprofit centers. Nonprofit centers is what I'm looking for. All my hobbies are nonprofit centers where I physically will pay to do these things, and I don't care if they cost me a lot of money. Where a lot of people are try to turn their hobbies or their pursuits into profit centers, and then you have to deal with the ugliness of making profit. And my job makes profit and it's very business-like. So again, that's a polyfurcated life. I have all these interests. They're not these nonprofit centers, and I have a very rigorous, like a professional sort of single thing that keeps things going. And then I have my family life. So I just see it as break them in multiple pieces, right? And all these pieces are important to me. I don't have anything to tout other than Tarot Tuesday and the regular Saturday and Sunday shenanigans that we get up to on Twitter. So people that know me know what those are.
I think the best thing to do is, if you're interested in finding more about Ernest, follow him on Twitter. A lot of his outputs there, a lot of his great rituals, great projects that he does that just really bring a lot of joy to that corner of Twitter. And I totally agree with you on your philosophy, by the way, Ernest. This is a labour of love for me. I don't have any commercial desire. It's just a way for me to have great conversations with fascinating people. Really have to wrap it up there because we are over time. But thank you so much, Ernest. It's been an absolute pleasure having you.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Speak soon. Take care.